You are being hit by two arrows right now. The first arrow you can't avoid, the second one. You fire it yourself. Every single day. And here's the terrifying part, most people live their entire lives never knowing this. They keep pulling the bow back, they keep releasing, they wonder why they're bleeding. Buddha discovered something 2,500 years ago that explains every unnecessary suffering you have ever felt, every sleepless night, every regret that keeps circling back, every wound that should have healed but didn't. He called it the second arrow. And once you truly understand it, I mean really understand it, not just hear it, your relationship with pain will never be the same. Let's be honest about something most people don't want to hear. Life is painful. That's not a pessimistic view. That's the first thing Buddha said when he sat down to teach. He didn't start with joy or love or enlightenment. He started with suffering. He called it dukkha. And his very first teaching, known as the First Noble Truth, was simply this: suffering exists. But here's where people completely misunderstand Buddhism. They hear suffering exists and they think Buddha was a pessimist, a man sitting under a tree giving up on life. That couldn't be further from the truth. Because what Buddha actually said next was far more radical than any self-help book written in the last century. He said most of your suffering is optional. Not all of it, but most of it. And the teaching that unlocks this, the one insight that separates people who live in quiet peace from those who live in constant internal war, is the teaching of the two arrows. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you will change how you see everything. Picture a young man in ancient India. He's walking through a forest, and suddenly an arrow strikes him in the shoulder. The pain is immediate, intense, real. He cries out, he bleeds. This is the first arrow. Now here's the question Buddha asks. What does the man do next? Most people, and I mean almost everyone, immediately fire a second arrow, but not at an enemy. Directly into themselves. Why did this happen to me? I should have taken a different path. This always happens to me, I'm cursed. What if the arrow is poisoned? What if I die? I can't believe this. My whole journey is ruined. The wound from the first arrow, that pain is real and it's unavoidable. But every thought that followed, that was the second arrow, self-fired, voluntary, and in many cases far more damaging than the first. Buddha didn't invent this as a metaphor to be clever. He was pointing at something he had observed and verified in the deepest recesses of human experience. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is largely a choice. Not a simple choice, not a light switch you flip, but a real one. And understanding the difference between the two is the foundation of everything. Think about the last time something genuinely painful happened to you. Maybe someone close to you said something cruel. Maybe a plan you worked on for months completely fell apart. Maybe you received news you weren't ready for. The event happened. That was the first arrow. But then the mind started working. It replayed the moment, over and over. It catastrophized about the future. It compared your pain to others' happiness. It asked why in a tone that expected no answer. It judged you for feeling pain. It judged you for not feeling the right amount of pain. All of that was the second arrow. And here's what makes this teaching so quietly devastating. We live in a culture that normalizes the second arrow. We're trained to overthink. We're trained to ruminate. We're praised for how deeply we suffer because somehow it signals that we care. But Buddha is sitting across from you, looking you in the eyes and saying, "You are making this worse, and you don't have to." Now here's where this gets really interesting. Because the natural response to learning about the second arrow is to say, okay, I'll just stop firing. I'll stop the negative thoughts. I'll think positive. And that response, that is also a second arrow. This is the trap most people fall into. They learn about their suffering. They judge themselves for suffering. They feel guilty for not being peaceful enough. They stress about their stress. Buddhism has a word for this: papanika, mental proliferation. The mind's compulsive tendency to take one small thing and spin it into an entire universe of meaning. A minor embarrassment becomes evidence that you're fundamentally unlovable. A failed project becomes proof that you'll never succeed. One difficult morning becomes, my life is falling apart. The mind doesn't just experience things, it narrates them, it inflates them, it weaponizes them. And what makes Buddha's insight so far ahead of its time is this: he wasn't telling you to fight your thoughts. He wasn't telling you to replace negative thoughts with positive ones. He wasn't telling you to be stronger. He was pointing at something much deeper. He was saying, look at the thought itself. Not at what the thought is about, but at the thought as a thing, a passing event, arising and fading like a cloud in the sky. When you're in pain and your mind says, this always happens to me, Buddha isn't asking you to argue with that thought. He's asking you to notice that a thought just occurred. That's it. Notice, don't follow it, don't fight it, let it arrive and let it leave. This is what mindfulness actually is at its deepest level. Not relaxation, not incense and soft music. It's the ability to see your own mental activity without being consumed by it. And here's the twist that most people completely miss. The second arrow is not you. The second arrow is a habit. A deeply conditioned, automatic, learned habit of turning pain into a story. And like all habits, it can be unlearned. Not overnight, not with one meditation session, but gradually, patiently, and persistently, it can be unlearned. Let's go deeper, because this teaching has layers. Buddha taught this specifically in a discourse called the Sallatha Sutta, the Arrow Discourse. It's one of the oldest Buddhist texts that exists. And in it, Buddha draws a clear distinction between two types of people: the uninstructed, ordinary person and the well-instructed, noble disciple. Both people feel physical pain. Both people feel emotional pain. The body of an enlightened person hurts just like yours. But here is the difference. The ordinary person, when touched by physical pain, grieves, laments, beats their chest, weeps, becomes distraught. And then they add mental suffering on top of physical suffering. They experience two pains, the body and the mind. But the well-instructed, noble disciple, when touched by physical pain, they don't add the layer of mental anguish on top of it. They experience one pain, the physical reality, nothing more. Buddha then uses a metaphor that is almost unbearably precise. He compares the ordinary person to a man struck by two arrows, the enlightened person struck by only one. The same world, the same pain, one arrow or two. The difference isn't the external world. The difference is in the relationship with the internal world. Now let's bring this into your life. Think about anxiety. Real anxiety has a physical component, a racing heart, shallow breath, tightness in the chest. That's the first arrow, your nervous system doing its job, signaling danger. But what most people with anxiety experience isn't just the physical sensation. They fear the fear itself. Why am I anxious? Something must be really wrong. I shouldn't be feeling this. This means I'm weak. What if the anxiety never goes away? The anxiety about the anxiety, the suffering about the suffering. The second arrow, fired again and again. The same applies to grief. When someone we love dies, the grief is the first arrow. Raw, honest, necessary grief. It is the price of love, and it deserves to be felt fully. But then the second arrow comes. I should have spent more time with them. I'm not grieving correctly. Why can't I just move on? Other people have it worse. What right do I have to be this sad? And suddenly the grief, which was real and valid, becomes tangled with guilt, shame, comparison, and judgment. The first arrow wound festers because the second arrow keeps reopening it. Buddha is not asking you to stop grieving. He is asking you to let the grief be pure. To let pain exist without turning it into a story about who you are, what you deserve, or what it means about your life. Pain that is allowed to exist cleanly, without narration, passes through. Pain wrapped in story stays for years, sometimes for lifetimes. This is not philosophy. This has now been confirmed by modern neuroscience. Studies on trauma, mindfulness, and emotional regulation all point to the same finding. The rumination, the mental looping, the self-judgment, the catastrophizing, is what converts acute pain into chronic suffering. The brain can process raw emotion relatively quickly. What it struggles to process is emotion fused with narrative, identity, and judgment. Buddha figured this out sitting under a tree, 2,500 years before brain scans existed. Now I want to ask you something. And I want you to sit with this question, rather than just answer it quickly. Think of the thing that causes you the most suffering right now. Not a passing frustration, the deep one, the one that shows up at 2 a.m., the one that hides behind every distraction. Now ask yourself honestly, how much of that suffering is the first arrow, and how much of it is the second? How much of it is the actual reality, and how much is the story you're telling about the reality? Because here is something that might genuinely disturb you. Most people have healed from the first arrow years ago. The event is over, the person left, the failure happened, the embarrassment passed. The first arrow was removed by time, by change, by life moving forward. But the second arrow is still embedded. Because no one taught you to remove it. No one told you that the voice in your head saying this defines you is not you. That the spiral of what does this mean about my life is not wisdom, it's a habit. And here's the deeper question. If most of your suffering is optional, if the second arrow is something you're doing to yourself, not something being done to you, then who are you without your stories of suffering? This is where Buddhism gets genuinely strange and profound. Because Buddha says the suffering isn't just caused by the second arrow. The second arrow is caused by something even deeper. He calls it upadana, clinging. The mind's desperate, automatic need to cling to things, to pleasures, to beliefs, to identity, to the idea of a permanent self that must be protected at all costs. We fire the second arrow because somewhere, the mind believes that the first arrow is a threat to who we are. Pain doesn't just hurt, we make it mean something. And the meaning we attach to it, that is the real source of suffering. So what do you actually do with this? Here is the practice, and I'm going to give it to you plainly. The next time you're in pain, physical, emotional, relational, whatever kind, do this. First, feel the pain fully. Don't suppress it, don't run from it, don't perform strength. Let the first arrow hurt. It's real and it deserves acknowledgement. Second, notice the moment the narration begins, the exact moment the mind starts saying this means, or why does this always, or I should have, or what if. You don't have to stop the thought, just notice that the thought is happening. Say internally, there's the second arrow. That single moment of recognition, that tiny gap between the pain and the story, is where your freedom lives. Third, ask, is this thought helping me or hurting me? Not is it true? Because the mind is very good at making painful stories feel true, but is it helping? If the answer is no, you don't have to follow it. You can let it pass like weather. This sounds simple. It's not at first. Because the mind is extraordinarily attached to its stories. It has been practicing this for years. It believes that ruminating is problem-solving. It believes that self-criticism is motivation. It believes that catastrophizing is preparation. And every single one of those beliefs, Buddha would tell you gently, is a lie the mind tells to justify its habit. You are not your thoughts about your pain. You are the one who can notice those thoughts. That noticing, that quiet, spacious awareness that can observe the mind without being swept away by it. That is what Buddhist practice is pointing toward. And here is the deepest, most staggering thing I want to leave you with. Buddha didn't teach this because he was immune to the first arrow. He taught this because he had completely stopped firing the second one. He still felt pain, he still experienced loss, he still watched people he loved suffer and die. The first arrow found him as it finds all of us. But there was no second arrow, no story, no clinging, no why me. Just the clean, present reality of what is, held with absolute clarity and compassion. And in that space, the space that opens up when you stop adding suffering to suffering, something else becomes possible. Not happiness in the shallow sense, not the absence of pain, but peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't depend on your circumstances changing. The kind that doesn't require life to be different from what it is. The kind that exists not despite pain, but within it. Here is the final thought I want you to sit with. The first arrow is life. The second arrow is the argument with life. And we have spent years, some of us decades, in that argument, exhausted, wounded, confused about why we keep hurting even when nothing new has happened. Buddha looked at this with complete, unflinching honesty and said, "You can stop arguing, not because life will become perfect, but because this moment, exactly as it is workable. The question isn't whether life will hurt you. It will. The question is, after the first arrow lands, who do you become?